everyone, welcome back to Actual English. I'm Jennifer Clyde. It's time for lesson 314, and today we're going to start with our favorite hangout 1 and describe the environment. So we'll talk about the environment, surrounding environments, for example. You can talk about a specific hangout place. It can be a place or a town or a village in which you grew up in, and you can talk about the environment, what it was like growing up, what things were like back then. You can even talk about, present places you like to go to. Talk about the environment, the atmosphere, what you can see, what you can feel. Okay, so if you're ready, let's begin with our first segment. It's time for Actual Talk.
Growing up, I was very fortunate to have lived in the countryside, which in England, pretty much everywhere outside of London is classed as the countryside, compared to somewhere like Seoul and Korea, where it's all very industrialized and built up. But because of that, I was always in and around trees and nature. So whenever I have any free time, I love to just get back into that old style and just get around some trees and some nature and really ingrain myself back.
I'm the same way. I'm totally the same way. Whenever I have the opportunity, I'm always trying to go somewhere where there's trees, or I grew up around a lot of lakes.
Oh, wow.
So water, whether it's the ocean or fresh water, I'm okay with either. Yeah. I mean, I like being in the city, and the city is a really cool spot, I think, growing up. But as I get older and start thinking about starting my own family, it's hard for me to imagine raising children in a place where they don't have trees to climb and they don't have fields to hang out in with their friends.
It's character building as well. Being out in the countryside, you know that you're on your own a little bit more. You know you need to be aware of your surroundings and what's going on.
I think it kind of nurtures a creativity too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to just stay home, play video games. We didn't have smartphones at the time, so it was, you'd go out into a field and imagine a house, and pick up little twigs, and this is our fork, and this is, let's cook something.
See, now, where we came from, the twigs were guns and knives and bows and arrows, but that ability to take yourself back somewhere and just really enjoy being back with nature is something that, for hanging out and just relaxing, I really can't find anything better to do.
It's nice to go back to the basics.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, today we have Martin and Mary talking about their favorite hangout places, or hangouts as we also call them, and they talked about certain environments. They talked a lot about the countryside and a bit about the city, how busy it is, how crowded it is, how nice it is to grow up in the countryside. Okay, so let's check out what they've mentioned in more detail. Here we go. Martin says, growing up, I was very fortunate to have lived in the countryside. So he begins by talking about living in the countryside, not in the city, but in the countryside. Now, what does he mean by saying that he was very fortunate? Just means that he feels that he was lucky to have had lived in the countryside. So you can say, I was very fortunate to have lived in the countryside, or I was very lucky to have lived in the city, for example, okay? And he says in England, pretty much everywhere outside of London is classed as the countryside. Okay, so what does he mean here? He's talking about, for example, in England, pretty much everywhere outside of London. Okay, for example, all places but London, all those places are classed as the countryside. They're categorized as the countryside, okay? So they're identified as the countryside. London is not the countryside, but all other places are all countrysides. That's what he's saying. And then, of course, he says compared to somewhere like Seoul in Korea, where it's all very industrialized and built up. So we're talking about many places, okay? All places. Not only Seoul, but even surrounding cities. All other places that surround Seoul, yes, they're all very industrialized and built up. Now, if a place or an area is built up, it means that it is developed. And if you say that an area or a place is industrialized, you're saying that it either has or has developed many industries. It means that there are many people and activities going on. So he has made a comparison. London versus, of course, Seoul. He's saying, well, in England, London is the only place that's not classed as the countryside. But when it comes to Korea, Seoul and all other places are very industrialized and built up. They're developed. Okay, now you have an idea of what he's talking about, right? Okay. But because of that, I was always in and around trees and nature. To be in and around. This basically means that he was surrounded by, okay, trees and nature. So he could have said, because of that, I was always surrounded by trees and nature. I was always in and around trees and nature, surrounded by something, okay? So whenever I have any free time, I love to just get back into that old style. Get back, return. So he likes to return to that old style where he used to be in and around trees and nature. So he really seems to like trees and nature. And what else? He says, just get around some trees and some nature. So this is what he loves to do. He likes to surround himself with trees and nature. He likes to get out there, perhaps go to the countryside to really, really enjoy the beauty of nature. That's what he likes to do. Now here we go. Mary's saying, I'm the same way. I'm totally the same way. I am completely the same as you. Whenever I have the opportunity, I'm always trying to go somewhere. Now, let's check out where. Where there are trees. Aha. Or I grew up around a lot of lakes. So she grew up as a little girl. She spent a lot of time around lakes. I grew up around a lot of lakes. So water, she says. She was surrounded by water. So she says, whether it's the ocean or fresh water, I'm okay with either. So she's saying, I'm okay with the ocean or even fresh water. As long as it's water, she's fine with it. Any type of water, she's fine. It does not matter. So Mary also seems to be, a nature type of person. She grew up in the countryside. She spent a lot of time surrounded by nature, but she, yes, grew up around a lot of lakes. So she's more of a water person. She likes the ocean. Same here. I love going to the beaches. Okay, and then she says, I like being in the city. And the city's a really cool spot growing up. But as I get older, meaning as I age, and start thinking about starting my own family. Do you remember what this means? To start one's own family means to get married and to have children of your own. So you're starting your own little family. So she says, as I get older and start my own family or think about starting my own family, it's hard for me to imagine raising children in a place where they don't have trees to climb, nor fields to hang out in with their friends. So she's saying that it's hard for her to imagine. It's hard for her to, draw up this mental image. Picture, imagine, okay? Raising children in a place where they don't have trees to climb, nor fields to hang out in with their friends. So she's a believer. She believes that children should be, raised in places like, countrysides rather than cities, although cities are a great place to grow up. she's not against raising children in the city, but I think she's saying if she were to have an option, she would definitely choose to raise her children in a place with lots of trees where they can surround themselves with nature. Now let's take a look at nor here. N-O-R, okay? N-O-R, nor. This is often used in the conjunction form or adjective form. It's usually used to, I guess, describe a situation where you're going to repeat something in the negative form, negative statement that is. So when somebody states something negative and you want to agree with them in a negative way, you can use nor, okay? Neither nor, remember? So if somebody says, oh, we don't want to go to the party, then you can say, nor do I. Neither do we want to go, okay? So it's just a negative way of agreeing with the other person, okay? So moving on, Martin says it's character building as well. What is character building? It's easy, word for word, character. We're talking about a person's personality or a person's character, and building, something that strengthens or improves. So if you say character building, you're saying that it's something that either strengthens or improves a person's character. So what is character building? Being out in the countryside. You know that you're on your own a little bit more. That's right. You know you need to be aware of your surroundings and what's going on. So he is saying that it's, a character building experience. It's also a learning experience to live in the countryside. Now, what is surroundings? I've been repeating this many, many times. Environment, surround oneself, but also surroundings means things that are surrounding you, okay? Things that are around you, for example. Now, Mary says, I think it kind of nurtures a creativity too. To nurture means to encourage, okay? Nurture means to encourage. So it kind of encourages a creativity as well. Being in the countryside or growing up in the countryside. Definitely he agrees. Now, Mary says, we weren't allowed to just stay home. Now, they were not. Mary's talking about her and her brothers, perhaps. We were not allowed to stay home and play video games. Did we have video games? Oh, yes, we did. Okay. We didn't have smartphones at that time. Nope, we didn't. So you'd go out into a field and imagine. Here we go. As I mentioned, it means to picture, draw a mental image in your head or your mind. So you would go out and imagine a house and pick up little twigs and say, hey, this is our fork. Let's cook something. Okay? Now, what is she talking about? She's talking about what she used to imagine as a little girl. What she used to imagine, her brothers and sisters as well. So what they would do is, they didn't have smartphones. They weren't allowed to stay home. Their parents would always say, go outside, go out and play. So they would go out into a field where there are trees and grass and imagine. They would think, picture something, okay? They would draw a mental image in their mind. They would maybe imagine a house and pick up little twigs. What is a twig? T-W-I-G. Here it's added, used in the plural form, twigs. A twig is like a small branch. So often you will see small branches or small wooden pieces that have fallen off from trees or tree branches. So they're small sticks, for example. So what they would do is pick up those small sticks and say, hey, this is our fork. Let's cook something. I think in Korean we would call it sokopjangnan, right? Okay, so you're cooking and making food with rocks and stones and twigs, things like that. That's what she used to do. And Martin says, where we came from, the twigs. What were twigs? Were guns and knives and bows and arrows, okay? So Mary's talking about how as a little girl, she would imagine cooking, okay, with those instruments or materials. she would find in nature. But for boys, they would pick up twigs, small sticks from the ground, and say their guns and knives, and they would be soldiers and fight with each other. Bows and arrows, they would shoot each other. So these are the games that used to play outside, outdoors. That ability to take yourself back somewhere, to imagine that you are somewhere else and enjoy being back with nature is something that's for hanging out and just relaxing. So he's saying it's a great way to hang out, spend time with your friends, and also it's a great way to relax. And he says, I really can't find anything better to do. It's true. Nowadays, it's really hard to find anything better to do. We see kids, they're so caught up with their school studies. They have so many places to go after school, so many lessons to take. Just think about, of course, people that are my age or around my age or older. We used to play outside after school. I would go home from school. I would throw my backpack at home and say, bye, Mom. I'm going to go to the playground. And she would usually yell from the window of her apartment and say, Jan, come home, it's time for dinner. And that's when I would go home, all dirty, just covered with dirt and dust. Yeah? So that's what he's saying. Moving on, Mary says it's nice to go back to the basics. You will hear this quite often, back to the basics, back to the basics. Basically, you are stressing the main principles of something. You're stressing simplicity. You're saying simplicity is the best. The old style were the best. You're stressing fundamental principles, okay, the importance of fundamental principles. And of course, Martin says, yeah, definitely. So I think it's nice to go back to the basics sometimes. What do you think? Okay, everyone, let's take a listen to actual talk one more time.
Growing up, I was very fortunate to have lived in the countryside, which in England, pretty much everywhere outside of London is classed as the countryside, compared to somewhere like Seoul and Korea, where it's all very industrialized and built up. But because of that, I was always in and around trees and nature. So whenever I have any free time, I love to just get back into that old style and just get around some trees and some nature and really ingrain myself back.
I'm the same way. I'm totally the same way. Whenever I have the opportunity, I'm always trying to go somewhere where there's trees, or I grew up around a lot of lakes.
Oh, wow.
So water, whether it's the ocean or fresh water, I'm okay with either. Yeah. I mean, I like being in the city, and the city is a really cool spot, I think, growing up. But as I get older and start thinking about starting my own family, it's hard for me to imagine raising children in a place where they don't have trees to climb and they don't have fields to hang out in with their friends.
It's character building as well. Being out in the countryside, you know that you're on your own a little bit more. You know you need to be aware of your surroundings and what's going on.
I think it kind of nurtures a creativity too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we weren't allowed to just stay home, play video games. We didn't have smartphones at the time, so it was, you'd go out into a field and imagine a house, and pick up little twigs, and this is our fork, and this is, let's cook something.
See, now, where we came from, the twigs were guns and knives and bows and arrows. But that ability to take yourself back somewhere and just really enjoy being back with nature is something that, for hanging out and just relaxing, I really can't find anything better to do.
It's nice to go back to the basics.
Yeah, definitely.
Welcome back, everyone. It's time for actual expressions. Are you ready for some vocab words and patterns? Okay, then let's get started. We've got the word industrialized. We were talking about, places, especially in Korea, not only Seoul, but places other than Seoul are almost all very industrialized and built up. Okay, industrialized. Here we go. Stress goes right here. Industrialized. Industrialized. And it means developed or even modernized. Okay. Nor, as I mentioned, it's used in the conjunction form or the adverb form. Nor nor, okay? So you can say neither, not any, nor yet, nor. It's often used after neither. In many, many cases you will hear nor after neither, okay? What about surrounding? In today's actual talk, it was surroundings with an S. What are we talking about? We're talking about the environment, ambience, okay? Things that surround you, things that are around you, okay? Surroundings, usually used with an S at the end, surroundings. Moving on. Nurture means to care for, provide, nourish, foster, or even to encourage, as I mentioned. And what about imagine? Here we go. Imagine means to fantasize, envision. As I told you, it means to form a mental image in your mind. Okay, it means to picture something. And twig is a noun. I told you in the most simple way, I would say that a twig is a small piece of stick, a small branch from a tree, okay? So you can also call it a limb or a sprig as well. Okay, now let's move on to be classed as, okay? There's also a way of saying this, very similarly, to be classified as something. Okay, it's very similar in a way, but we're looking at to be classed as. It means to be identified as a particular group or category. Okay? A person that owns a dog is classed as a dog lover. Okay? They're thought to be dog lovers. They're described as dog lovers. Okay? Moving on. Character building is what? As I told you, it's very easy. Think of character building, something that strengthens or improves a person's character, very much like a person's personality. There is a slight difference between personality and character, okay? The work that I'm interning for has proved to be a great character building experience. So you're saying that the work that I'm interning for, okay, the internship is a great character building experience. It really helps to strengthen and, improve my character. And then moving on to back to the basics. Back to the basics means to stress the importance of simplicity, fundamental principles. Here's a sample sentence. The band went back to the basics. Okay, using only guitar and piano. So they went back to the basics. Simplicity it is. Okay, that is all for today's actual expressions, everyone. Job well done. Practice them more on your own.
I don't exactly have a favorite hangout spot per se, but I have always been partial to a good cafe, whether I need to study, get work done, meet up with friends, or just relax. Cafes are usually my go-to spot, especially since there are so many to choose from here in Seoul. Usually, I like to go to privately owned cafes as opposed to franchises like Starbucks, Cafe Bene, or Holly's. These cafes tend to have much more to offer, whether it's a unique dessert or a specialty drink or even a really cute theme. These places also tend to be much smaller, so it doesn't get overcrowded or too noisy. But overall, privately owned cafes are the kind of places that I like to go to just because they're so unique and so cozy.
Today we had Alexis from America helping us out. Now, what did she mention? She mentioned something about nice cafes, how she prefers cafes. So let's take a look at what kinds of cafes she was talking about. She goes, I don't exactly have a favorite hangout spot per se. So she doesn't necessarily have a favorite hangout spot or hangout place. But I have always been partial to a good cafe. To be partial to something, in this case, be partial to a good cafe. To be partial to something means to prefer something. Okay, so she's simply saying that she prefers to go to nice cafes. She doesn't have a favorite hangout, but she likes to go to good cafes or nice cafes. Cafes are usually my go-to spot. A spot she goes to, okay? Especially since there are so many to choose from here in Seoul. That's right. There are many, many, many of them, so they're easy to come by. They're on every street corner. And then I like to go to privately owned cafes. Privately owned cafes as opposed to franchises. Okay, so she likes franchises? No, she rather prefers to go to privately owned cafes than franchise coffee places. Privately owned cafes are so unique and they are cozy. Okay, so instead of going to these big chains or franchise chains, she likes to go to rather small, privately owned cafes because they are very unique and also very cozy. I would have to agree with her. Okay, let's take a listen one more time.
I don't exactly have a favorite hangout spot per se, but I have always been partial to a good cafe, whether I need to study, get work done, meet up with friends, or just relax. Cafes are usually my go-to spot, especially since there are so many to choose from here in Seoul. Usually, I like to go to privately owned cafes as opposed to franchises like Starbucks, Cafe Bene, or Holly's. These cafes tend to have much more to offer, whether it's a unique dessert or a specialty drink or even a really cute theme. These places also tend to be much smaller, so it doesn't get overcrowded or too noisy. But overall, privately owned cafes are the kind of places that I like to go to just because they're so unique and so cozy.
Today we talked about favorite hangouts or favorite hangout places or spots, you can also call them. And we talked about the environment, the surroundings, the atmosphere, the ambience of these places. I hope that you learned a lot. Next time we're going to start a brand new category, and yes, we're briefly going to be talking about norebangs. So if you have your own stories related to norebangs, yes, you can talk about that with your friends. But we'll have a chance to listen about, our friends' norebang stories next time. So please do tune in for that. In the meantime, come to our homepage, everyone. Come on over to www.ebse.co.kr. Look for Actual English with Jennifer. And if you have any thoughts you want to share, post them up on our message board. Well, that is all the time we have for today's Actual English. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again next time. Until then, take care and bye for now.